Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, friends and colleagues. In recognition of the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, the World Maritime University is hosting a webinar to share information about the Stakeholder Consultative Forum that we established under the Empowering Women program. Today we have the whole team, and you can see everyone just on the screen today. We have a few others who's on duty travel. So for today's session, I haven't said who I am. My name is Zhen Sun. So I am the co-principal investigator with Professor Momoko Kantada for this program. And so today we call it information sharing. So it mainly will be for us to introduce to you what we do under the program. So I'll share a couple of housekeeping matters, then I'll hand it over to Professor Long to do the introduction. So today we have this webinar session, but we keep the chat function open. So here all the participants can take the chance to introduce themselves, put contact information, or any information you want to share relating to the topic on gender equality or empowering women for the UN Ocean Decade. The second point is that you can use the Q&A session to ask any questions relevant to the program. And the third session I want to mention is that we wanted to keep it as an interactive session towards the end. If we may move to the next slide. So during the webinar, we're going to run a poll and ask you to share what are the good practices in your professional experience to promote women's empowerment. We will launch the poll right now, and we will end the poll when we come to the end of the session. We'll share some of the examples that we take from here. So that's all from me, and I will hand it over to Professor Rona Long to open the webinar today. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Professor Jensen. It's really a great pleasure to welcome everybody to our Stakeholder Forum for this very important program on the empowerment of women for the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. First and foremost, I'd like to reach out to every participant across the world and say, thanking you for supporting this initiative. I would also like to thank Fisheries and Oceans Canada, the primary sponsor for this program, as well as the Nippon Foundation in Japan, which has been a stalwart supporter of our institute here in Malmo. It's a beautiful day in Sweden, and I'm sure we're very nice to be talking to a global community, both in America and the Americas, and indeed in late in the evening in Asia and in Australia and the Pacific. This session is focusing on the research aspects of our program, and we have three speakers, the first of whom is Dr. Maria Amalia Rodriguez Chavez from Costa Rica. Maria Amalia is an international lawyer. She also acts as a consultant for the High Seas Alliance on the BBNJ agreement. And of course, those negotiations are commencing at the Intergovernmental Conference for hopefully the final session next week. Very important empowerment provisions in the draft treaty, which we hope to see adopted soon. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Maria Amalia for her to speak about her strands of research and engagement. Maria Amalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Prof. Ronan, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. My name is Maria Amalia Rodriguez. As mentioned before, I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the Empowering Women program, and I'll be sharing some key aspects which jointly with my colleagues Ellen and Renes have identified in our respective research projects. Next slide, please. So you will see here that we will be focusing our presentation in the value of collecting gender disaggregated data, also the identification of good practice that could enable gender equality and leadership, and a critical element that should be in place to ensure the effective implementation of gender equality action lines. Within the Empowering Women program, my research focuses in exploring gender equality and the role of women in governance bodies that mediate the delivery of ocean science into policy action. So within the scope of this project strand, we have been coordinating with 5 intergovernmental organizations that you will see on your right, with the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the Joint Group of Experts of the Scientific Aspects of Marine Environmental Protection, GSAMP, the Division of Ocean Affairs and Law of the Sea, and the International Seabed Authority. As well, we have been coordinating with 2 non-governmental organizations, the International Union for Conservation of Nature and the High Seas Alliance. Next slide, please. So to really start on the first point that I mentioned before, these 3 elements that we will be addressing during our presentations, the first element is the value of collecting gender data. Gender disaggregated data entails multiple benefits. For example, it enhances a well-informed decision-making process within intergovernmental organizations and non-governmental organizations. It's also critical in building baseline information. It helps to evidence the investment in capacity development programs that seek gender balance. And also it may strengthen accountability, for example, within the reporting or audit to monitor gender mainstreaming activities. Nevertheless, there are challenges present, such as for the specific secretariats that we have been working with, not all member states collect and provide disaggregated gender data, for example, on the delegations or their respective focal points. And in other cases, organizations might have this information, but they don't have a specific plan on how to use it. So moving to the second element that we want to highlight today is good practice that could enable equality and leadership. Some valuable examples of support structures for gender equality are the ones that we are introducing in the next points. For example, training opportunities in leadership and management, mentoring programs and progress advice. Also, mandates, guidelines, criteria on gender balance in the selection of senior or leadership positions. Well-established human resources to enhance transparency, pay gap analysis, and improve recruitment process. As well, opportunities to apply for flexible working hours, for example, options for caretakers, on-site childcare, and on reporting to keep track of the progress that the respective organization has been doing. Moving to the next slide. So finally, an important point has to be made that even though there are gender equality action plans or policies in place, their implementation sometimes is challenging for different organizations. In this context, some elements that should be in place to ensure effective implementation of gender equality action lines are strong leadership within the organization, minimum standards for gender mainstreaming, for example, having statistical databases with sex disaggregated data, gender balance assessments, or performance indicators. Also, dedicated time and allocated resources, including funds for gender equality actions within projects and programs, support structures and networks for women, and frequent trainings. With this, I finalize my intervention, setting the scene for the next 2 presentations by my colleagues, Ellen and Reyes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rodriguez Chavez. A wonderfully succinct analysis and indeed presentation of the data that you have received from 5 intergovernmental organizations, as well as the High Seas Alliance. And of course, we're going to have an interactive session later in the webinar, and we would reach out to those joining the session to answer our poll, which is online. Secondly, I'd like to turn to Ellen Johansson, who is a PhD candidate and research assistant here at the Global Ocean Institute. She works in marine science administration at the coordinating office at the Secretariat of the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, otherwise known as ICES. And of course, ICES is based in Copenhagen, just across the bridge from Malmo here in Sweden. Ellen has a very rich interdisciplinary background and has done extraordinary research in this program in the context of ICES. Ellen, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Professor Long, and thanks to everyone at this webinar who came in to have a listen about our program. And I'm really privileged to have an opportunity to tell you a little bit about the research that I'm doing, which is really focused on understanding the role of gender in the practice of international marine science. And as Professor Long mentioned, I'm focused on the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, ICES, where I work. Next slide, please. So as Maria Amalia told you, I will also talk a little bit about the value of collecting gender data, about the good practice, and the factors that have been critical towards effective implementation in my own case study. Next slide, please. So for those of you who aren't familiar with ICES, we're an intergovernmental organization that coordinates marine science in the North Atlantic. We have 20 member countries. We have more than 150 expert groups, 6,000 experts, and around 2,000 contributing every year to our work. And we're currently, we don't have the information, the gender disaggregated information to understand how people of different genders are contributing to the work of our organization. Next slide, please. So ICES has been around for more than 100 years, and I often show this, some slides that kind of show the dominance of men in the organization over time. This picture is from 1929, a meeting at the House of Lords. And although the history of the organization, especially at the top levels, have been very much dominated by men, I wanted to, of course, highlight that women have been contributing to this organization since the very beginning. Down in the bottom left corner, you see a picture of Dorothy Thursby Pelham, who was the first English UK seagoing scientist. She was an active member of ICES, and she was known for her pencil drawings of emperor penguin embryos collected on Scott's last Antarctic expedition. Next slide, please. So talking about where we are today in ICES, the value of collecting gender data, we need all kinds of data when we're talking about gender equality. We need quantitative data, but we also need qualitative data. So on the left, you see this pyramid here where I started to count because we don't have the self-identified gender disaggregated data that we need, which of course, when you're inferring gender based on first name, it's limited to the binary, which is not best practice, but going forward, we're working on implementing a system where people will be able to identify their own genders. But this pyramid shows that the further up the organizational hierarchy you go, the fewer women that you find. And this is also evident when you do counting, and the bottom pie charts there on the bottom left, you see keynote presentations by gender at our annual science conference, where women only take one of 3 slots every year. The middle pie chart shows that when women are judged on their specific, or when people are judged on their specific scientific contribution, women have actually done very well over time, winning 2/3 of the awards. But when we get to the Outstanding Achievement Award and the Prix d'Excellence, these are awards at the career level that require nominations. There, we have very few women as winners. So this kind of quantitative data on representation is really important for us to think about where in the system there might be some bias, where we need to try and think about making sure that this is there's equality of opportunity. But it's also important to collect this kind of qualitative data. At the beginning of this process, we ran a survey and collected information from the people in our community about the kinds of experiences, gender-based experiences that they have had. And we had a lot of people contributing things about being subtly excluded, even though they were the known expert, or not being heard, being left off of emails, unconscious bias and everyday sexism, or progression hindered due to family, comments about bodies, or persistent unwanted sexual advances. And I think it was really important for us to have this data around our own community, because it really showed this was not something that's happening in other disciplines or in other communities. This is something that's happening in our community, and we need to do something about it as well. Next slide, please. So all of this data really helped us to form our gender equality plan, which was adopted in October by the Council. And our gender equality plan is based on qualitative targets around creating a gender fair organization, fostering an inclusive working culture, making a family-friendly working environment, ensuring protection for everyone from harassment and violence, having professionalized gender equality work, and promoting awareness of sex and gender in research. And all of this is supported by quantitative indicators, including resources allocated, leadership and gender diversity, equity, inclusion training, analysis of the gender pay gap, expert groups working on sex, gender, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also continuing to count proportion of people and gender by gender in leadership and decision-making roles, expert groups, and staff roles. Next slide, please. So of course, I think all of these are kind of organizational things. I think that women in a lot of different industries will be familiar with. But I think that what's special about marine and ocean science is some of the challenges that are faced when people conduct field work going to sea. So there is also a lot of both culture and infrastructure things that need to be changed to promote gender equality in ocean-going research. So things like gender bias and social norms in science at sea, we need to start to change those cultures. And thinking maybe other ways of promoting a good work-life balance when people are away at sea. It can mean they're away from their families for a long time. We need to, we've also identified gender insensitive design of ships, operations, and personal protective equipment, for instance, that is only designed for a certain kind of body or type. And we need to think about how we operate those in a more gender fair way. And then just a general lack of safe working environments. So those things we can kind of start to counteract by training and awareness for scientific researchers, but also for the crew that go to sea. We need to think more in advance around gender sensitive design of operations of research vessels. And then not to just make gender equality plans and policies, but find ways to implement them. And that can be very difficult when people are out at sea. So working on effective implementation. Next slide, please. So I think in the ISIS case, what has been really, really important is to have resources committed. So I think signing up to support the World Maritime University, allowing me to conduct my PhD research, that has been very critical. But also having executive level commitment on from having leadership on board. You can't really make changes without them. But then you also need to have community level engagement. And we conducted a participatory process for the development of our gender equality plan. And I think that was really important because you need to take the community with you and have their inputs to make the plan really living. And I think all of this is contributing to creating an inclusive working culture that is willing to and vulnerable enough to talk about these issues and to think about how to make change. Next slide, I think that's the last one. Yeah, so thank you very much. And I will pass the floor on from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Very insightful. Absolutely groundbreaking research in so many respects. And of course, we welcome engagement with the Stakeholder Forum. A Stakeholder Forum is crucial for legitimacy in relation to the design of the action plan and strategy for the empowerment of women. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the conversation towards our third contributor this afternoon, Renes Ojwala from Kenya, who has a bachelor and master's degrees in aquatic sciences. She also has worked in the for Worldwide Fund for Nature Conservation in Kenya, as well as in the field in relation to fisheries. Currently, she's a PhD candidate and research assistant here at the Global Ocean Institute, and she's looked at the issue of gender empowerment in a number of marine scientific research institutions and other organizations in Kenya. Renes, you have the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Long. I am Renis, as you've been told, and I'm from Kenya. And my research focuses on gender equality in ocean science for sustainable development, analysis of ocean science institutions in Kenya. So first and foremost, I would like to, this is the same as my colleagues. We'll take you through introduction and the value of collecting gender data, good practices, and effective implementation. So first and foremost, I would like to wish everybody, women in ocean science or women in science, a happy International Day. And I would like to recognize the substantial contributions and roles, especially those in Kenya who are engaged in mangrove regeneration, seaweed aquaculture, sea turtle conservation, and many others. Next slide, please. So I conducted my research in Kenya, and the aim was to examine gender equality and women's empowerment in ocean science related institutions. And I'm glad to say that a good number of them participated. And I had 3 or 4 categories, that is the public universities, NGOs, IGOs, and government agencies. Next slide, please. So these are my objectives. I planned to evaluate gender policies and also look at the gender representation in ocean science related institutions. I also examined barriers to gender equality in these institutions. Also used a theory called feminist political ecology to see other social dimensions like age, education, and class, and how they intersect with gender to continue escalating the gender inequalities in these institutions. And lastly, I explored the gender practices that are involved or included in these institutions. Next slide. So to start with, based on policy evaluation, I noticed that not all institutions had gender policies. Only 30% of the 27 institutions had gender policies. And these policies were mostly gender neutral. They didn't have gender specific strategies. And the ones that had gender strategies, as you can see from the screen, the ones in red, that were above the national standards. And it's also important to note that most of the institutional policies were outdated and were inconsistent. That is that there were mismatches between what the policy was saying and also the gender balance of the student and staff in those institutions. Next slide. So looking at the gender ratios of the students in the universities, public universities, I also noticed that there were lower representation of female students in terms of enrollment. And looking at the years, 10 years period of understudy between 2010 to 2019, there was a decline. And also the same trend was recorded in MSc degree as well as PhD levels. Next slide. Further to the staff, gender ratios in I compared the 4 categories of the staff, and as you can see from the first graph, the universities, government agencies, NGOs, and IGOs, all of them were not performing so well in terms of staff representation, except maybe I can say the NGOs that did well with 45%. And looking at now career-wise or career levels, the universities showed that most staff were under non-tenured positions with 60%. The NGOs had more women in management positions. IGOs had more women as directors, but the government institutions did not have a very good representation in almost all the positions. Next slide, please. So looking at the qualitative data, I won't present all the data that I collected from the questionnaires and interviews. I will only talk about the barriers that were mentioned by the students and staff. And among the students, cultural barriers, gender discrimination, sexual harassment, and lack of financial support in terms of study fees were the most common barriers that were mentioned. And to the staff, they described promotional guidelines to be discriminatory, sexual harassment and bullying. Some of them experienced those. Work-family balance were also mentioned as the most obstacles to their career progression. Next slide. So based on good practices that were mentioned or identified by these participants, they mentioned that their universities or institutions had gender policies, which was a good thing. They also mentioned that there's current change and women are involved in leadership positions, although there were few. There was also a mention of universities having gender centers as a focal point to tackle issues of gender-related issues. And there were mentions of mentorship programs and having role models in these institutions, and also equal opportunities to take study leave by both men and women staff in those institutions. Next slide. So way forward is just to ensure that the gender transformative policies are developed and to ensure that they are regularly monitored and effectively implemented so that we can go beyond the 1/3 gender role for women. The gender disaggregated data, which was also missing in most of the institutions, I recommend regular collection of data and equitable admission of students and recruitment of staff. And also under representation in leadership positions, we have to commit more resources to engage more women, need network, and also training opportunities. We need to recognize and support women in leadership positions as well. Next slide. Okay, thank you so much for your attention.
Renis, thank you very much. Very insightful and again, groundbreaking research in many respects. I suppose I can take the prerogative of the moderator. One common feature of the three presentations is the importance of baseline data. I think there's nothing new there for members of the scientific community across the world. The importance of collecting data on gender is of paramount importance before you design a strategy or action plan, or indeed before you implement a strategy or action plan. A second element, I think, was common in all of the presentations, the importance of setting both general and specific objectives in relation to empowerment. Thirdly, I think all of the presenters emphasize the need for openness and transparency and responsibility. And it came across very clearly that there's a lot of work to be done, not only at the institutional level or the governmental level, or indeed in the intergovernmental level, but also in relation to individual actions. And of course, we discovered that right away here at the Institute, where we had to start our gender empowerment training here at the Institute. And of course, I think that's very, very important. It has to start with the individual. And I think it's incumbent on all of us that have responsibilities in relation to personnel that we should make that training available and indeed encourage broad participation. We move now to the second part of our webinar this afternoon, which is the interactive session on engagement and the participants of the forum in relation to what your views are on the action plan, what your views are on the research, and indeed your views on the way forward for the Decade of Ocean Science. This is an endorsed action for the decade, And of course, we're just at the start of the decade, and we have to work towards a particular objective of 2030. Crucially, in this respect, engagement is of paramount importance in relation to such a fundamental issue as human rights and ocean science. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to my colleague, Associate Professor Jen Sun, to facilitate this session. Again, I would encourage all of you to complete the poll, as well as post your questions or indeed comments in the chat function. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Long. Thanks to my colleagues who presented before, explaining what we are doing under the program. So what I will do is to explain a little bit about the Stakeholder Consultative Forum that we launched for this program, and how we want to engage with the participants here. Could you move on, please? The next slide. Yeah, thank you. So as Rona mentioned earlier, the program was launched. The launch of the program as a January was in the 2019. We started the recruitment process, our postdoc PhD candidate, and at that time we were thinking just to focus on what is given to us under the program. And I think once we started interacting with the community of the marine science community, we realized how much this program was needed. So that led us to be a little bit more engaging with the decade process. And that led to our endorsement with the decade. I think our engagement with the different participants within the decade forum is that there is a need to set up a community for people to be able to discuss this topic. And also identifying the need is one part of our mission, or sorry, one of the findings is that we can actually play a role under this program. And we also recognize there is a rich experience and knowledge within the communities of the marine science, and they can actively contribute to the research that we do here. So those are the reasons for us to consider launching a Stakeholder Consultative Forum. And we did the official launch at the UN Ocean Conference in June last year. We have been working with the IOC, UNESCO, the decade team to set up communities of practice for the Empowering Women Forum that was just launched earlier this year. And we will share the link later on with all the participants for you to register for the forum. And that will provide a digital platform for the research team and to communicate with the participants. So for the Stakeholder Consultative Forum, why did we set it up and what do we want to do with it? It essentially starts with individual actions that we want everyone who's perhaps less familiar or gender with to be getting more familiar with the issue of gender equality and the need to promote women's empowerment, and to join us with this action to start the movement within our own day-to-day life, as well as our professional work. The second reason for us is to be able to gather and share knowledge and the research output on these related topics. The last point is for us, mainly through Maria Amalia's work for this draft strategy and action plan for international intergovernmental bodies to set up a strategy and action plan for empowering women, particularly for the decade process. So these are the three objectives that we wanted to engage with the participants of the forum. There is a barcode on the screen that you can register and to be able to participate with the forum. We launched this forum in June, and through different promotions, if I may move on, we currently received, as of this morning today, we have received 118 registration. So our team helped to provide a little bit background of the participants who have registered. As you can see, I think the most sort of not surprising fact is that this topic attracted 2/3 of women among all the participants so far, that's pretty much corresponded to many of our organized events under the topic of empowering women. Somehow we need to do better to make sure that gender inclusive includes all participants. But currently, this is where we stand. We have over 70%, 76% of female participants, and many, I think, the two largest sectors are academia and NGOs. I think from Renis's research work and also Maria Amalia's, we have identified that in the more relaxed or more flexible working environment, we can actually see more women participating in the professional work, and many of them have the opportunity to raise to a senior position. But when we come to intergovernmental organizations and government agencies, this is a different picture. And I think, again, looking at the participant that's interested to contribute to the stakeholder forum, this reflects the same situation, that women are probably better represented in those two sectors. If we may move on. This is the region that we gathered so far from all the participants. I think empowering women or gender equality is more of a universal issue. And we will work to promote a wider participation through our engagement with the decade. And with that, we would call for help from all the participants. And it's only through this two-way interaction that we can promote this through through across the world, especially for women who's more oppressed or underrepresented regions. Next slide, please. So for how we sort of envisioned we can engage with the participants, we think this is the current plan that we have a little bit timeline that mapped out for what we want to do within this year. The first option, or probably a relatively easier to launch option, is to organize webinars like this one, but we will have a more selected thematic topics, issues relating to women's empowerment or gender equality in ocean science. In doing that, we also consider we will invite external partners to contribute to different topics, and also to have topics probably on scientific elements if we have the right collaborator partners. The second one is the interactive platform that I shared before. It's been set up under the community of practice with the UN Decade of Ocean Science Network. We will send out the invitation for everyone who registered for both the forum and today's webinar to invite you to participate. The Ocean Decade Network is a good platform that will disseminate research output, and also for everyone to share information, including mentorship, internship, as well as different employment opportunities. So I would encourage anyone who's relevant to the decade, relevant to ocean science, would be participating in the Ocean Decade Network. The third one is something we to consider on a more individual level, is we know there is a rich experience and knowledge among all the participants. So we want to know what is your story and your experience. So hopefully we will identify the people who want to contribute, to invite them to participate in our events or share stories through interviews or online blogs. The last one we're currently thinking is to do a more in-depth survey or launch a discussion meetings to discuss the draft strategy and action plan that is under development with the team. If I may move on. So we need to refresh on the answers. So I would still continue to encourage you to submit to the poll. Currently, we received 20 responses. I don't have time to copy and paste everything, but I did manage to select some of the examples. So what I will do is to share with the participants what are the more common responses that what do you consider as good practices? And before I get into the list, I just want to sort of echoing what my colleagues have shared before, the 3 key elements that they identified through their research finding. The importance of collecting gender disaggregated data. It helps us to understand what is the status quo. It also contributes to the decision-making and drafting of policies. The second is to, the second is the good practice, how to establish enabling equality and leadership. The third one is really focusing on effective implementation. It's not enough for any organization to just have a policy or plan, but just put it on the shelf without actually implementing it. And from the, I think when I calculated, it was probably cut off from the 17 or 18 answers, is that there are repeatedly mentioned items are education, mentoring, and training opportunities. I think acknowledging women's contribution. The second, providing equal opportunities for women in all sectors, promoting enabling environment, not just fixing women, including women in decision-making process. And that too also being highlighted is that being there or including women on paper is not enough. It has to include women's active contribution. The last item that I copied is having gender transformative policies and the gender equality plan, as mentioned by the team before, and also to pay attention to the implementation of this policy and equality plan. I think these are the general information that we want to share with you about the program and what we want to do with the stakeholder forum. Having said that, if I may move on, I would, next slide, please. The registration page. Yeah, thank you. I will keep the code here for 1 minute. And if you haven't registered to the forum, I would strongly encourage you to do so. Currently, we maintain this stakeholder consultative forum through an old style email list. We will continue to share the planning the activities and the information through the email list. At the same time, please go on to the Ocean Decade Network platform and find us under Empowering Women Forum. That will serve in the meantime as an interactive platform for the forum. We will see how these 2 elements evolve, and if they become merged, then we will consider another option for how to engage with everyone who registered for the forum. I will stop here. I think I will pass it on back to the team and to answer some questions that you have shared. Thank you.
Okay, may I give the floor to maybe we start maybe in the order as you appear in my screen. Ellen Johansson, would you like to comment a little bit more on the forum, or indeed answer some of the questions? And I see Dr. Paula Kellett posted a question in the Q&A. Please, Ellen.
Thanks, Professor Long, and thanks, Paula. I did write an answer here to your question, which is about if, part of the ICES community, if it's encouraging, if the gender equality plan is kind of encouraging them to take what they learned at ICES home, or what kind of allyship can they have even if they're not in leadership positions. And I think that's really what I've tried to work on in my work at ICES in every day. And I'm really grateful that the chairs of the committees and the executive leadership have had the support from them. And they've been putting this work on the agenda. So at our regular meetings of our science committee, I'm on the agenda and facilitating conversations with members from all 20 member countries. And also the same with our chairs of ICES expert groups, where we facilitated a subgroup where the experts, the chairs of the expert groups got together and talked about, within their sphere of influence, what could they what could they think of to make their working cultures more inclusive? And I think, facilitating these kinds of discussions and creating this kind of awareness is really what's critical for breathing life into a gender equality plan. So it isn't just a piece of paper, is allowing people the opportunities to bring their own personal experience to this work. We are having a special session at our annual science conference in September on diversity, equity, and inclusion in marine science. Also gender equality is part of that important part of diversity and inclusion. So if anyone in the audience has some great work that they're doing on these topics, please have a look and consider submitting an abstract, because I think it's going to be also a really great opportunity for people for us to kind of share experience about what's happening in the ISIS community and beyond. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ellen. I think that's a great example and a great point about it's not about paper policies, it's about implementation and practice. And of course, you're uniquely placed within the ISIS community, and we're reaching out to the ISIS community as well as PISAs and these global and regional marine science bodies, and indeed institutions across the world, to become very active on this particular issue. I'd like to pick up on one of the issues that you raised there, which is the issue of implementation of policies. And I'd ask maybe Dr. Maria Amalia Rodriguez Chavez, have you any examples of action plans or strategies which have moved the dial on gender equality?
Thanks for Ronan. And thanks for the question. So maybe just to give some context about the project strand that I'm focusing on, and as mentioned before, I've been collecting data from different IGOs. Most all of them are under the United Nations system. So there are like other well-established action plans and policies in place. However, the implementation it's a real challenge, and maybe on that specific question about an example that you can comment on. Maybe the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, they have a very strong gender-sensitive language included in different policies and strategies. And for example, there are like even the specification of actions that has to be taken by the parties of the convention and also by the secretariat. However, the participation of women in bodies and also in delegations that are participating in this convention has remained very slow. And I also think that some of our participants in the webinar maybe saw the picture of the last COP in Egypt in December last year, where even though we have these very strong gender equality policies in place, the picture reflected that a majority of men were heads of delegation, and maybe from 100 and something participants in that picture, there was like a very, very few women. So that's also to recall on one of the key aspects that the three of us have highlighted in our presentations, that even though you have strategies and action plans in place, you need to really invest in their implementation so that we can have this transformative culture in our organizations and also in our professional lives. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Maria Amalia. I think a general question which is being posted there by Mercedes is, empowerment of women and the empowerment of gender is a human rights issue. Right? The question is a very topical one, which is how do we engage with more men in this particular issue? And we can even see that in the, shall we say, the constituency of the forum as it stands, less than one third men or one third males. So any ideas, maybe Renis, or indeed has your research shown up any insights on that particular question? Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I think what we can do to include men in ocean science related issues is just to talk to them. Yeah, because some of them are so resistant. I can give an example of when I went to collect data, and when I just entered in an office and introduced myself and explained what I needed was gender ratios data, and also to talk to men and women, get to know their challenges. There was one person who actually directed me to a female colleague in the name of "I don't do gender issues." So it's a challenge, and we really need to convince them, because some of them are just the mindset and the culture and how can I say, the social norms and beliefs, especially in African countries, has been a major challenge to reach men and to convince them that women can actually also work in these male-dominated fields.
Thank you very much, Rennis, for sharing those insights. Ellen.
In terms of getting more men involved, I think one thing we need to do is make some kinds of training almost mandatory in our organization, so that not making things optional, because then when we do, I know that can be a bit controversial, you find that there's only one person. But I also think this idea, or one kind of person that comes to the training, and it's usually the people who maybe are already aware of the issues that the training is about. And I think that it's also important, I mean, like from the ICES example, I think it's been really good that we have this mainstreamed in our, at the meetings of our science committee where we're talking about it. And we need to there's a business case for gender equality, and that's really important to make. There's also like a science quality case to make around, teams work better when we have, more diverse perspectives included. And I think those things are important, but shouldn't be the only thing. The other thing we need to, this is a social justice issue as well. And I think we should all be concerned about that. So business case important, but shouldn't be the only selling factor. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. And Rennis, please.
Just to add on what Elena said about training, I remember some of them were complaining that when it comes to gender issues, they always call women and leave them behind. They are not always engaged or involved in any meetings related to gender. So the one thing is just to make sure that they are involved in all the activities that are related to gender, so that they feel wanted in this initiatives.
Thank you very much for that, Rennis. And I suppose in light of the day that we're celebrating, there's a very relevant question posted, which is, how do we involve youth in this particular campaign? Maybe some of my colleagues might be reflecting. I think this is a very important issue, particularly for universities and indeed for those involved in education. One of the things we do here in the Institute is every year we reach out to our local schools here in Malmo, and where the youth become ocean ambassadors for one day. And they come in and they question the PhD and the postdocs in relation to their research. And then they present their research findings to the rest of their colleagues in the class. I know ocean literacy is a big issue. It's something that's very topical here in Malmo. We have a wonderful center. See you, Michael. I hope you and your colleagues are joining us this afternoon. But perhaps maybe some other ideas from the floor on engagement with youth. While you're reflecting on that, there's a question posted by Tanya Bryan, which is, how can we have a stronger women empowerment or a gender component to projects and project work?
If I may, and jump in very briefly, thanks, Tanya, for that question. So I just wanted to share that, for example, on the collection of data that I did for the different intergovernmental organizations, the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, they have a very specific kind of, it's targets, but it's also how to mainstream gender equality within every planning of projects or programs. So that I found that very useful, because apart from envisioning some specific actions that you should have to consider when you're planning a project or a program, also setting specific resources to encourage gender equality action lines was another useful requirement. So it takes maybe something very theoretical to practice in the programs and the projects that you want to deliver. So yeah, I can look into that specific document that I'm talking about. And of course, if you want to reach out, more than happy. But yeah, I think that those kind of, when you transform those more specific items in your planning of projects and programs, they seem to reinforce the delivery of gender equality actions in reality.
Really, I think fantastic answer. And a related question goes to, everybody's an individual, and every organization is different, and every country's policies vary. Intergovernmental organizations, even within the UN systems, are very often different on empowerment strategies. So the question that's posed by Sasak, which is, how do you ensure that, or how do you address this diversity with one action plan and strategy? Or do you require an action plan, a strategy, which are tailored to socioeconomic needs, or tailored to national, regional, or indeed institutional needs? A general question for the floor, and you can raise your hands for those who wish to answer this. Maria, please.
I'll take the floor very briefly, and thanks Vasak for that question. Yeah, I think that it depends on the different dynamics of each of these IGOs and NGOs that we have been coordinating with. And of course, I think that the idea of the development of this strategy and action plan as part of our output of our program, it's just to offer some like action lines and objectives and goals. But each of the IGOs, some of them already have these kind of instruments in place. So yeah, the idea is that if you can improve what you have already in your organization, it's always good, yeah, that you can improve and be better on gender equality. And also being, of course, conscious about the diversity of cultures, also on the gender equality action plans. So yeah, I think that it depends on each of the organizations, but it's not that if you already have something in place, you shouldn't be aiming to better your own improvement on this specific topic.
Fantastic. And Ellen and Rennis, would you like to comment? I see Professor Susan Buckingham. Please, would you like to take to the floor in that issue? Susan Buckingham, by way of introduction, is a gender specialist, and she's been advising the program team since its inception. Really nice to have you on board this afternoon. Susan, please.
Thank you, Ronan, and welcome to everybody. I just wanted to go back to the issue about how we involve more men. And I've also seen Yaya Yadan's question about involving high-level champions, one male and one female in Africa, which I think is a fantastic idea. And I'd just like to raise the possibility of masculinities training, really, because I think where most gender training seems to be done by women, and I think that we fail then to engage with the very people that we want to become more aware of gender inequality. And there are some really excellent masculinities trainings that are done by men, of men, working peer to peer. And I think that's a really interesting model that we can explore within this program and with the stakeholders. So that's the point I just wanted to make. And I think it would be brilliant to go forward with that in different contexts.
Thank you very much. And of course, this is an appropriate time for me to say a very warm hello and thank you to the High Level Advisory Group that advises this program, who give their time and have shaped the program since its inception. Indeed, we met with the high-level advisory group last week, and they raised a couple of very practical issues. For example, the way we design our research programs at sea, the way we design our research vessels at sea, the way we are receptive to caring responsibilities. And these are very practical considerations, and I would hope that the Decade of Ocean Science provides us with a very benchmarked way to address these issues in the context of ocean science across the world. Maybe on the issue of mentorship, because I know this has come out in the 3 strands of research, both Maria Amalia and Ellen and Rennes. Would you like to comment on mentorship or your own experience of this?
I can jump in and just say that I'm I've been a very lucky recipient of some excellent mentors in my career of all genders, and that has really helped me in my career progress. But I think that's also something that's coming through very importantly in the research I'm doing too, the conversations that I've had with people from the ISIS community about the role of mentorship. And I think maybe we also need to think about how we encourage people to mentorship, and finding time for mentorship is something important that we need to think about.
Thank you very much. And Rennes, would you like to comment on mentorship?
Yeah, I really value mentorship because I feel like where I am right now is because of mentors. I've had so many in my life. From say high school, from my principal high school, who allowed me to go to the last year of my studies because of my lack of parents. So I had no fee, and I stayed there all year without paying. And after that, I got to the university, and also got female professors who were always ready to write my unending recommendation letters, applying for scholarships and so on. They were always sharing opportunities. So I really value and really recommend or request all the women in science to continue supporting, mentoring, and also encouraging young women to get into this exciting field of study. And even from my data collection, I also asked my participants, both students and staff, how they found themselves in ocean science related program. Still analyzing that data, but so far I noticed that women were more attracted to this field because of their role model, maybe their mom, their auntie, or their teacher who convinced them to take up these courses. So it's a good thing compared to male who were only interested in jobs. Those are the answers. Workplaces, they were interested because of maybe some other issues apart from role model or mentors.
Oh yes. Yeah, look, you've articulated that point so well, and I would hope that many of our audience across the world draw strength from your experience, and you're such a strong advocate for empowerment. So look, I'm very conscious of the time, so I'd ask each of our contributors, as well as Professor Jensen, and indeed I see Professor Momoko Kitada on the screen, a gender specialist here at the World Maritime University. Congratulations, first and foremost, Momoko, on your promotion to professor this past week here at the university. So maybe in honor of that, I can give you the floor first, 2 minutes per person, and on the issue of empowerment and where we're going with the strategy and action plan.
Sorry, so should I go first? Sorry, I wasn't quite sure which one is the first, but thank you very much, Professor Ronan. I think you are one of those male champions at the university, also the ocean science field. And I also really appreciate this opportunity that all these young researchers are very much progressing the knowledge that we have about this empowering women in the ocean science. I've also typed in some of the, trying to answer some of the really very good questions from the audience. I think we are still learning, and we definitely need everybody's inputs and feedback so that we can co-design and co-create this the new knowledge of how to integrate the gender perspectives into this ocean science conduct and delivery. So I'm not, I don't need to say anything more, but I'm very much proud of being part of this team, and very much looking forward to engage with all the stakeholders in this forum, and also those who are joining us in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria-Amalia.
Thanks. Just then, as well as Momoko, just to thank everyone for your time and your contributions. It has been a very, an exciting learning experience myself as well, because I'm more on the, come from a law of the sea background. So getting to know better about gender equality, now that you have the gender lens on, it's impossible just to ignore some of the things that we may be facing in our professional practice every day. So I do invite the audience just to keep engaged into the forum, really share your experiences, good practice, challenges. That kind of information, it's very valuable for us as well to take into account on the products that we are developing, as such as the strategy and action plan. So please keep us posted, and thanks for your time today.
Renus, please. Thank you, Maria-Amalia.
So mine will be part of this answering this question from Victor, asking about the recommendations of my findings and the action plan. I would recommend and emphasize recollection of data or gender analysis, because you can't solve something you don't know. And I noticed that most of the institutions are not collecting gender ratios data for the student, for the staff, based on the progress, based on the levels of career, and every component in the institutions. So if we have the data, we can actually know where we are going wrong, and we can now make the strategies, have the strategies to tackle those issues, or disparities that are involved or are in our institutions. So I recommend collecting data, and those that have policies that are outdated, please do revise them, and make sure that you have what it takes, including gender-specific strategies, so that you can tackle the barriers that are currently hindering women from participating in these institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Renus. Hugely insightful. And of course, we must report and monitor the evidence. So that's going to be a key issue for the decade going forward, right up to 2030. How are we doing on these metrics of equality? Okay, Alan, please.
Thank you, and thank you to all the stakeholders for joining us here today. And I guess I just want to highlight the Ocean Decade as an important opportunity for moving towards achievement of the SDGs and making progress on gender equality. But I think it's big and small things that will get us there. So it's not just we need these big gender equality plans, but I think it's important to remember that it's also individuals and how we, it's our own actions that can really bring life and make progress on these things. And we are all need to think about how we can contribute and bring everyone with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. And Associate Professor Jensen, please.
Thanks, Ronan. I'd like to join the team. Thank you for everyone for joining us today. And I think my last word will be strongly encourage everyone to register for the Stakeholder Consultative Forum in order for our research output to be really solid and can withstand time and the different fields. I think we need your input it's only by the community support that we can actually deliver a product that is for the community and would support the community development as a whole. I also echo what Ellen said, that the decade is a good platform, and also I think it's a really good opportunity for us to highlight. We have really good buy-in from the decade team and IOC UNESCO to support the program. Also, in answering to partly to Tanya mentioned whether we consider supporting other research projects to be more mainstreaming gender in their research project. This is also one of the issues that came up with our high-level advisory group discussion last month, is that it is for the program to consider working with the decade team, with the programs that is under the decade, to come up with a practical toolkit set that to help the different research program to consider gender equality, and for the decade to promote this topic more equally, to make gender really a central pillar for the decade process. In order to do that, we need your support. So please register for the Stakeholder Forum joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Jen-san, and lovely. It's been an absolute great webinar, very insightful, wonderful insights. I'd like to say a very warm thank you to our donors, Fisheries and Oceans Canada. I know it's very early in the morning in certain parts of Canada and perhaps early in the afternoon, closer to us here in Europe. I'd also like to say a very late good night to our colleagues, or very early morning to our colleagues in the Nippon Foundation in Japan. We cannot do these webinars unless we have the support of the team behind the team at the World Maritime University. And I'd specifically like to thank Elnaz, Mercedes, Flavia, and Flora, as well as our colleague Maya in the World Maritime University. Most of all, it's perhaps a very nice occasion to say hello to the ocean science community across the world and the team at IOC UNESCO that has facilitated this particular workshop. And of course, we reach out to everybody and wish everybody a very warm day to celebrate this remarkable milestone in the lives of scientists across the world, particularly women and girls in science. And the ocean science community is a very important one in a whole range of issues. And what we would like to see is gender equality and the empowerment of women is placed as a central pillar for the implementation of the Decade of Ocean Science. And we will be returning to this issue in a number of webinars going forward. So from all of us here at the World Maritime University, at the Sasakawa Global Ocean Institute, we would say goodbye to our colleagues in Africa and of course in Europe. Good morning to those in the Americas, and of course a very late good night or a very early morning to those of you in Asia. Goodbye from Malmo.